Fall of Voluun, Castaways, by Jason Halstead, published by Novel Concept Publishing, LLC. Like and subscribe so you know when the next part of this series is released. Chapter 8.
Arika led them toward the docks without speaking. Indeed, even Ganner with his long legs had to work hard to keep up with her. Halfway there, they spotted Delani and Slab walking up the shallow incline of the road toward them. Delani waved with his free hand. His other held his tankard.
We have...
Arika began, but the elf talked louder and faster in his excitement.
This place is a mess. Rivers poisoned, and all their children have been taken. Can you believe it? Stolen children.
Arika let out a heavy sigh.
It's true. Could be something we might do to gain their trust.
Delani turned to stare at him, his eyes wide in shock.
Take their children.
Ganner snorted.
Saints, elf, you're drunk!
Well, I don't think I am. They have really good ale here.
He's right about that. Best mushroom oil I've ever had, and I've tried my fair share.
Oh, and the fruity ones are amazing.
Raisin cleared his throat and interrupted them.
We've spoken with the mayor. Lady Arika reached an agreement with him. He'll help, but we have to help him.
Oh, that's good. What are we helping with?
The poisoned river and stolen children.
Delani's jaw dropped.
You heard about them too?
Slab groaned and shook his head.
Did you hear about Arveen too?
Lady Arika glanced at Ganner and Raisin before asking,
Who's Arveen?
She's a hunter that brings game to the town. She also brings in the mushrooms and other supplies. Grows some herself, she said.
Why does she matter? Did she take the children or poison the river?
No, but she said the bad water is ruining her crops. Her place is on the eastern side of a river.
And she said she heard what sounded like children in the Elder Grove, but couldn't find them when she looked.
Elder Grove.
The forest.
Arika looked to the sky in the west. The sun was about to touch the mountains in the distance.
Take us to her.
Oh, sure. This way.
Delani started walking past them. Arika stood still as he walked by her.
You said you talked to her when you were at the docks.
She was making a delivery for dinner.
Arika kept her expression neutral.
And you know she went that way.
Said she was headed back home. That was the last of her stops for the day. She lives that way, somewhere.
Somewhere?
It's this way.
Delani called back to them while waving for them to follow.
Let's go then. If children were taken, I can't even begin to imagine what horrors await them.
Slab huffed and said, Sure, follow a drunk elf through a town and into a forest? What could go wrong?
I'm going to end up eating one of them before this is over.
What's that?
She lifted her head and started walking.
Nothing. Let's go before they get distracted by another tavern.
Good idea,
Raisin said and proceeded to head out ahead of her.
He's an interesting young man,
Ganner noted as they began to follow the others.
So you say.
She walked a few moments and realized she'd been letting her irritation show far too much of late.
How do you mean?
Look at you.
Arika looked down at herself and then looked away quickly. She looked a mess and she wasn't happy about it.
What about me?
You're a beautiful woman. Beyond beautiful, even.
Dressed like the homeliest of peasants.
Even so, we've all seen you otherwise. Even, well, you know.
Arika's lip twitched in an almost smile.
Yes, I recall. How does this have to do with Raisin?
He barely notices you. I mean, he knows you're there and he's aware of your beauty. But it doesn't faze him at all. He's quite respectful that way.
This is bad.
Not bad, just unusual. For a young man, especially one that seems morally ambiguous.
Thank you for your perspective.
Arika turned to look him up and down.
And what of you?
What of me?
Your interest in me seems lacking.
Oh, I'm interested. Not in betting you so much as making sure you're not something I'd be better off killing.
Arika stopped the growl in her throat before it started. She forced a smile instead.
I hope you can realize I'm a much better ally than enemy.
Ganner grunted and Reach shrugged his pack off. He opened it while they walked and pulled out a bundle of red cloth.
Picked this up in the market earlier for you.
Arika looked at the gift. She took it and held it up, allowing it to unfold in front of her. She looked the dress up and down and nodded.
Not exactly my style, but it's an improvement. Thank you.
It was red, a dirty yellow or green. Red seemed your color.
Thank you, Ganner. I'll have to change later, though.
Of course.
He took it back and bundled it back into his pack. Arika idly considered alterations to the dress while they walked. They caught up the others and were soon at the edge of town. Delaunay slowed only a bit before setting off down the road, soon veered towards the river. Arika smelled it first and led the way with a scowl. Delaunay was next, followed by Raisin, Ganner, Theo, and finally Slab.
That's foul.
Raisin wrinkled his nose at the stink that grew stronger with each step.
Is that the river? That's horrible.
Amidst the occasional gag and cough, they made their way further until only Arika, Ganner, and Slab dared to leave the side of the road and approach the river. The closer they grew to the bank, the more obvious the trees and tall weeds along the side were dying. Cottontails were brown and drooping, their heavy pods not yet mature and fluffy. Fruit on tree limbs shriveled and split, dripping dark nectar onto the ground.
Were those peaches? Or some sort of plum?
Apricots, I think.
Apricots. I've never had one.
Don't start with these.
They found a clear spot between weakened bushes and got their first look at the river. It had a muddy tint to it. Along the bank, hung up on rocks, stick, and even halfway up the dried mud, fish were rotting in the sun.
Saints of the deep.
Looks like they were trying to get away from the water. See how some were jumping half up the bank?
Why would anyone even try to drink it?
Arvine said it'd be getting worse. By the day, she said.
Well, let's see what else she has to say.
Ganner left the riverside last, still trying to find a reason for what was happening. Back on the road, the air was better, but it still stank of death enough to make even Delaunay reluctant to finish the last swallows of ale in his tankard. Never one to let a problem get the best of him, the elf soon veered off the two-track road and began to head to the north and east, toward the Eldergrove forest, and then inside of it before Arika could catch up.
Is this a shortcut?
Shortcut? Yes. That's right. Based on what she explained about her, where she lives, I know where to look for it. Honestly, the smell coming off that river, I figured why not save us time and our noses.
You can find it without a road or map.
Please, I grew up in a forest. Never doubt an elf in forest.
He pointed at a tree ahead of them and said,
That one there. Just a touch of sap can add a delightful flavor and a nice kick to a drink. That one there. The bush with the leaves, when steeped in hot water, will chase away fatigue. Oh, and the roots? Twice the boost and a natural painkiller.
The bush with the leaves?
Yes, that one. Right over there. No, behind that one.
Oh, sure, I see it.
The others hid their smirks at Raisin's obvious lie.
There you go.
Oblivious, Delaunay gave his tankard a gentle swirl, took a sip, and then put it back on his hook.
So then, the sun is setting and it gets darker in the forest. It is a bit warmer than where I grew up, but no matter, we shouldn't tarry.
Where did you grow up?
The forest. Not unlike this one, but not this one.
No, I meant we're at. Where was the forest at?
Oh, that. Yes. Voluun. The southeastern forests. A nice enough place, if a bit bland and boring. Not much happened there, so I set out for Voluun.
Oh, so, okay.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'll go back once the refugees are taken care of. Whatever effort is made to retake Voluun from the Infernals, I'll be there to help.
Yes, well, I left there for a reason. If the demons go there, it'll be the most excitement they've ever seen. Now, damn, empty. Where did I put that skin at?
Theo watched Delaney find a full wineskin in his pack and pour it into his tankard. He took a healthy drink, sighed, and put the now empty skin in his pack. The priest closed his mouth and sighed, then glanced at Arika. She was aware of Theo's attention, but chose to ignore him. She sniffed the air, looking for some clue beyond the stink behind them, and then let the elf lead them deeper into the forest. Delaney had nothing in common with her master, but she had wondered many times when Master John had taken them into the wilderness in what seemed like random directions. He'd once told her the journey had been more important than the destination, and without it, he'd not have become the man he was. That was all the proof she needed. He was far and away the best man the world had to offer. If a journey into the unknown had worked for him, then she would make it work for her too.
Chapter 9.
Did she say she lived this far from town?
Theo asked as he stumbled into Ganner. Ganner helped the priest keep his feet while Slab snorted.
She said she wanted to get far enough away to still have easy hunts. But no, so far that she couldn't bring her products to market.
Was that how she said it?
Something like it,
Be silent.
Arika hissed and stopped moving. Everyone save Delaney saw her and came to a halt. When Delaney kept moving, she hissed.
Delaney, be still.
The elf turned, saw everyone standing and said,
Oh, right. Sorry,
The look on her face in the near darkness was enough to make him bite his tongue. He fumbled his tankard to his lips and took a drink to keep from making noise. Arika turned her head and tilted it as she moved. Her ears twitched as she did this, each seeming to move on their own a bit. She straightened and looked at all of them in turn.
Did anyone hear anything?
Delaney let loose a muffled rush of passing wind. Arika closed her eyes.
Anything else?
No.
Ganner shook his head.
Just the elf.
Delaney smiled and shrugged.
Sorry, I heard nothing.
Arika looked around, her face tense and her jaw set. She nodded at last and said,
We should camp. It's too dark and we're not alone.
We're not?
I'm telling you, Arvine's house isn't much further.
Delaney, you'll take Lost Watch.
I will. Okay, I can do that.
I'll get up early with him.
Delaney looked at Theo and then at the others. He shrugged and began to look around for a place to lay down. He found a suitable spot near the base of a tree and slipped his pack off. 2 empty wineskins fell out as he found a bedroll and spread it out on the ground.
Fire?
Slab offered, and started looking for kindling and deadfall he could start a fire with.
I'll keep first watch.
As will I.
Raisin fussed with his pack and said,
Middle of the night for me and Slab then, fair enough.
Slab grunted from the darkness off to their right. Arika turned to Ganner and said,
I'll take that dress now.
Oh, right.
He pulled the dress out of his pack and handed it to her. He turned and started to see about making his own sleeping arrangements.
I'll be back soon.
Arika turned to walk into the darkness on the opposite side of the tree that Slab was scrounging up sticks from. She kept walking, heading several dozen steps into the darkness before she found a thick enough tree for what she wanted. She slipped her boots off and slipped her fingers through the laces. Her feet thickened and her toes lengthened, growing hard talons. Her fingers and hands did the same until she looked up at the tree and leapt at it. She sank her claws into it and bounded up with the speed and grace of a hunting cat. 2 sets of limbs up and jammed her new dress into the notch of a branch where it met the trunk and then set her boots on top of it. She clawed her way back down the tree and then reverted back to looking fully human. She removed the rest of her clothes until she stood naked in the near darkness. She sniffed, smelling nothing but normal forest smells, and then listened again. The strange noise she'd heard before hadn't returned, but she didn't think she'd imagined it. It had a lightness to it, a ringing perhaps, or maybe the high pitch of a voice, a child or woman's if any. She shook her head and fell forward, willing the change to take her and return her to the form she'd known first when she awoke. Her skin darkened and thickened, taking a leathery texture. Her fingers and toes returned to talons, and her joints and bones shifted and popped as they reshaped themselves. Her head lengthened and narrowed, with her chin and nose jutting forward while her cheekbones moved closer together. Her hair twisted together and morphed into spikes and horns that protected her head and the back of her neck. When Arika landed on all fours, a long serpentine tail now stretched out behind her, she was as she remembered. A dragonkin capable of great speeds and greater destruction. As much as she'd love to tear something or someone apart right now, she had a greater task ahead of her. She sniffed the air again, noting that she could pick up scents better like this, and caught the smell of a boar. She stifled her urge to roar out a challenge into the night and instead pounced forward. The hunt was on.
Chapter 10.
Raisin slipped into the darkness outside the feeble ring of light cast by the small campfire. He rustled some decaying leaves on purpose and then moved deeper into the jungle, taking care with where he stepped. Being seen and heard was a conscious decision, he believed. Right now, he chose not to be. He wasn't up to something sneaky or ill-mannered, though. He simply wanted to put some distance between himself and the makeshift camp so he could relieve himself. He was a private person, for one, and while he preferred cities to rainforests, he knew well enough to bury and hide waste. A few minutes and one random stick later, he was ready to return to the camp. He almost did, in fact, until he caught sight of a strange pattern pressed into the soft ground. He stared at it longer than he would have admitted before he realized what he was looking at. Arika's boots, with a smallish block at the back for a heel and the spade-shaped front. He looked up, his eyes easily discerning the shapes in the dark forest. The world was in shades of gray, but his people were blessed with eyes that could see in the darkest of places. Arika's footsteps continued away from the camp and into the sticky rainforest. Raisin shrugged and followed her tracks. They had no food to eat, and the only thing the fire offered was light he didn't need and extra heat. Why not explore and see if he could learn more about the peculiar woman Lady Arika was? It didn't take long to find the end of her trail, or the end of her boots at least. Perhaps the end of her, given her clothes that were lying on the ground at the base of a tree. There were other tracks as well mingling about. The tracks were smudged and he couldn't be certain about them. Then there was the slivers of wood and bark on the ground and the damage to the tree above them. He slowly looked up and walked around the base of it, peering into its branches. Had she been chased up a tree by an animal or monster? Had it followed her? Was she...
What in the...
Raisin trailed off as he caught sight of something wedged between a tree limb and the trunk. He thought it was a growth at first, and then an animal after that. It didn't move, and it was too smooth to be alive. Raisin walked around some more, trying to get a better vantage, and then finally looked at the tree trunk in front of him. The bark was damp and a little spongy. Climbing it was possible, but it would be messy and awkward. A rope tossed over a limb, though, that might speed things up. Raisin had his pack halfway down one arm when a sound made him stop. He stared into the darkness, waiting and watching. He saw something moving, some dark shape at the limits of his vision. With it, he heard more rustling, or the sound of something being dragged across the loamy forest floor. Raisin backed away and then darted further away to slide behind a thick tree. He waited and watched as the dark blob quickly became recognizable. Not that seeing the creature meant he understood it. A creature moved through the forest on 4 powerful legs. A tail dragged across the ground behind it, smoothing the tracks it made. The creature's head was feline, or so he thought at first. When it got closer, he began to make out details, but not colors. The details confirmed there was no hair or fur, but plates and ridges. Scales? He wasn't sure how to define them, but there was no doubt that the head of this monster looked exactly like what he imagined a dragon's head would look like. A dragon's head that was the same size as a regular person's, that is. In the creature's jaws was the slack body of a spotted cat, a very large spotted cat. Its tail dragged on the ground to the monster's left, and to its right the cat's head swept up leaves, sticks, and dirt. Raisin gulped. The jaguar was supposed to be the hunter here, not prey. If it could be killed, what was this thing? The thing in question dropped the jaguar at the base of the tree Arika had disappeared at. Raisin could only stare as the draconic creature stepped away from its meal, and then it began to shake. Raisin heard muffled pops as the creature's bones shifted and shortened. Muscles ripped and healed, and tendons snapped as they popped into different shapes and connections. The dark coloration on the beast lightened, and its horns and the ridges along its neck and back smoothed and fell apart. Lady Arika stood up, bare as a newborn but with her long golden hair falling about her face. She reached up and gathered it so she could pull it together and let it drape down her back.
Whoa!
Arika's head jerked around and stared into the darkness. Her nose wrinkled as she sniffed the air, and then she looked down at the ground. He saw her eyes narrow as her head picked back up. Then she was moving across the ground, her feet making soft, thudding noises from the soft forest floor.
I know you're there, Raisin,
she said as she approached the tree he'd chosen to hide and protect him. Rather than call the tree a traitor, Raisin stepped over and held out his hands.
Sorry, that wasn't being nosy.
Then what were you being?
He opened and shut his mouth, a grin and a shrug. Later he admitted,
Okay, maybe I was. I had to relieve myself, and then I saw your tracks. Seemed odd, leaving us like that for so long. I wanted to make sure you were okay.
Am I?
Okay?
Yes,
I don't know. Are you?
she smirked.
I'm much better now.
Good. Why?
I hunted. What I was after was found by this cat. I killed the cat and claimed my prize.
Then I brought back something for the others.
The jaguar?
Yes.
You do know that jaguars are hunters, right? Big cats like that are supposed to be the predators?
You saw me?
He nodded.
There's always a bigger hunter.
Raisin swallowed.
I guess so.
Do I frighten you?
Raisin raised an eyebrow.
I'd be lying if I said you didn't. Are you trying to?
She laughed.
Perhaps a little.
Are you planning on haunting me?
No, not unless you give me a reason to.
No reason here.
She looked him over again and then turned and walked back to her tree. Her feet and hands changed again, shifting into their half-human, half-scary monster that hunts other monsters form, and leapt up the side of the tree. She glanced down twice while she climbed, and both times Raisin was either looking around the forest or down at the dead jaguar. She wondered at his ambivalence to her nudity. She dropped to the ground beside him, startling him into a curse. He turned and saw her in her new red dress. She bent down to pick up her old clothes and then turned to Raisin.
Would you mind getting that?
You didn't have any trouble dragging it back here.
No, but I already ate. Have you?
Raisin frowned and looked at Animal. He sighed and moved over to it. He paused, realizing part of the reason it had so much blood on it was because she'd already ripped out its guts. That would lighten it a little, at least. He picked it up and struggled with the limp cadaver until he managed to get it over his shoulder.
So,
Raisin spoke to take his mind off the bloody load on his shoulder.
what are you, some kind of werewolf or something?
Hardly. I am Dragonkin. I told you this before.
You did? Oh, in the hold? Sorry. I was distracted by, well, everything. So what is a dragonkin?
I was created by my sire from his flesh, blood, and soul. He is dead now, and his soul is gone. But my master has seen to it that I have my own.
That's terrifying. Is he a dragon too?
No, he is a lord in Griffin Mont. A powerful wizard, enchanter, and more.
More?
So much more.
Arika's smile that made Raisin's skin crawl.
I am still a dragonkin. I was made from a dragon, but not born a dragon.
Oh, good. I was worried this was going to make sense soon.
Arika chuckled.
What you saw was me, in the form my sire shaped me into. What you see me as now is the form my master and I prefer. I can change between the two, and allow some variation.
I heard you change. Does it hurt?
I feel everything happening, but the pain is gone so quickly I don't even notice it.
Raisin shuddered and had to adjust the load on his shoulder.
Well, it sounds pretty painful. I'm sorry you have to endure it, and sorry that you've gotten used to it.
They walked in silence for a few steps before Arika admitted,
I'm having a hard time figuring you out.
Nothing much to figure. In fact, we might even have some things in common.
Oh?
You're related to dragons, and they like shiny things, right? Well, so do I.
Arika laughed and nodded.
I do like the finer things, yes. I haven't thought about acquiring a hoard as such, but that does appeal to me.
Other than that, I keep my head down and try not to put my neck in places where it might get stretched or cut off. Though,
And yet you find yourself being chased by demons.
better to be chased than to be caught.
Fair point.
The light from the fire twinkled ahead in the darkness. They approached it, but Raisin took care to keep his eyes away from the light and looking around them.
You're back,
Ganner said as they stepped into the firelight.
both of you. What's this?
I went out to change and realized I was being stalked. Raisin heard me and came to my aid, and I distracted the beast, and he killed it.
Raisin let the jaguar fall to the ground beside the fire.
It's no steak and veggies in a proper inn, but it'll do.
Slab closed his spellbook.
I've eaten worse.
Ganner looked Arika up and down and nodded.
The red suits you.
I hope you don't mind if I make some alterations.
It's yours. Do as you wish.
Thank you.
She moved to sit on the root of a nearby tree. The fingers of one hand shifted, gifting her with long, sharp talons.
You not hungry?
I already ate.
Right, heard about that at the inn.
I'm still hungry.
I'll get some roasting sticks.
Theo grabbed a burning branch from the fire to use as a torch to light his way. Arika watched them work together, while she worked on tearing out stitches and free parts of the dress she did not care for. It was a far cry from how she and her sisters had done things, but they were finding their way. Perhaps they could help her deliver her gift to Master after all.
Chapter 11.
Arika awoke to find Delaney sipping on his tankard and chewing some meat that Theo had packed in wet leaves to cook more slowly overnight beside the fire. She threw back the blanket covering her bare body and rose to her feet. She stretched, enjoying the sight of Delaney dropping his breakfast snack and staring at her from the side. Her nipples tightened at the attention. Delaney's jaw fell and would have joined the smoked meat if it hadn't been attached. Arika turned and scooped up the red dress she draped across the root from the tree. She bent at the hips, not her knees, and heard a strangled gasp from the elf. She rose slowly and held it up to inspect it before pulling it over her head and pulling it into place. Before the dress had flowing sleeves and puffy shoulders. They were gone now, the stitches removed, and the excess fabric tossed in the fire. She modified the skirts as well so that they would not restrict her legs from moving any direction she wanted.
Good morning to you, too.
Arika looked over at Ganner and smiled.
Hey, elf.
Delaney spun around and fell over a rock. He stumbled up onto it and threw his free hand out to balance. A branch the dwarf had tossed at him landed perfectly in his open hand. Instinct made him curl his fingers around it, and he jammed it down to help him stay on his feet.
Now you've got a staff too.
Slab said as he walked past him from where he'd been in the woods, taking care of his morning business.
Don't say I never helped you.
Delaney looked at the staff and noticed how it had been shaved smooth and had been hardened by the fire. He grinned and turned back to the face slab and the others.
Thank you.
That's some nice wood you've got there.
Delaney's mouth opened anew, but no words slipped from his gawking lips. His cheeks spoke for him with the rosy glow. Ganner shook his head and Theo chuckled in spite of himself.
Can you pick up the trail this morning?
Trail to Arvin's house. Yes, of course. Let me... right, it should be this way.
You sure about that? Wasn't it that way last night?
My good dwarf, trust me to know my way in a forest.
Slab opened his mouth, but Arika stepped up and put her hand on his shoulder. She gave him a quick shake of her head. He scowled and wrinkled his wide nose, but kept his counsel to himself. Arika picked up her borrowed blanket, flicked the worst of the forest detritus off of it, and then rolled it up and handed it to Theo.
Thank you for letting me use this.
Theo smiled at her.
I'm glad it could be of use. Proved I wasn't wasting space when I packed it.
A quick final check of the campsite was all that was needed. The fire was out and the coals buried. The leftover meat that couldn't be taken or eaten was buried as well. Blankets, bedrolls, and all spare gear was accounted for. There was nothing left to do but leave, and with a gentle tap of Slab's staff against Delaney's, the elf jumped out of his thoughts and flashed them a grin. Then they were off, heading deeper into the elder grove, though this time to the north instead of the northwest. The ground rose as they walked, and the forest canopy began to thin, allowing thicker brush to slow their progress. Delaney veered left after glimpsing the high hills to the north that announced the eastern edge of the Crescent Mountains that formed a natural wall around the center of the Scarletta. It wasn't long after that until Arika heard the noise again. She stopped, causing Raisin to brush against her as he tried to jump out of the way. He stumbled into a bush full of bright flowers and set a few bees angrily buzzing into the air. He jumped back, yelping and swatting at the air.
What are you for?
Bees?
Bees?
Yes, bees. Just don't worry about it.
Done.
Slab chuckled and then scowled when Arika shushed them. She moved, her boots and dress whispering against the grasses and weeds, while she tilted her head to catch the wind.
What's she for?
Delaney gasped and spun about.
I hear children.
Is it? I hear. It could be.
Delaney took a quick drink and wiped the excess of his lips.
This way.
Arika nodded and followed the elf as he plunged into the thicker bushes to the north. Her dress caught and tugged countless times, and she felt and heard more than a few rips along the way. She ignored it and continued after the energetic elf. The others trailed behind, with Ganner drawing a long knife and hacking at the more resistant brush. They were breathing hard and most had sweat running down their face by the time Delaney slipped through the last of the brush and stumbled into a tiny clearing between large oak trees. He turned as he stepped into and looked around into the towering trees.
Whoa, these are old.
Arika stepped into the clearing and narrowed her eyes. She circled too, but instead of the trees, she searched around them.
This seems off. Why are there no bushes here? The grass is short. The wildflowers. Are these normal? I've never seen flowers like these before.
They change colors.
Theo marveled as he took steps past some flowers, stopped, and then walked the other way.
Iridescent, like the scales of some fish.
Or a rainbow. Is that a rainbow up there? Between the trees? How much ale did he buy?
Got to be near the end of it.
The tinkling sound of childish laughter ran through the grove. They all heard it, and as one they all turned to where it came from. Delaney laughed and hurried forward.
We've found them. Right through here.
I don't...
Ganner began as Delaney darted through those trees and ducked behind one. They didn't see him come out from the other side.
Too late.
Damned fool. Just as well, he drank all the ale.
Come on. You get nowhere if you go back to where you started.
Arika followed Delaney and disappeared around the tree the same as he had.
Where we started is somewhere.
Where we started is overrun by demons.
Raisin sighed.
A compromise then, halfway between.
Go!
Slab brandished his quarterstaff. Raisin let out a humph and turned. He checked the rapier at his belt to make sure it was loose in his scabbard, and then slipped his bow off his shoulder and pulled an arrow from his quiver. He held them at the ready but did not knock or draw the string back. He nodded to himself and followed Arika.
Who's next?
Does it matter?
Come last, Theo. In case we have all been bitten in half and need healing.
Theo frowned and tried to think of something comforting to reply with. By the time he decided he had nothing, they disappeared too. The priest took a deep breath and hurried after, his holy symbol of Ayalea clutched tight in one hand.
Chapter 12.
The forest was different, brighter, more alive. The colors were vibrant and the air felt charged with something. Pollen, power, freshness. A giggle made Arika spin to her right. A shape moved through the trees and flowers. She saw a flash of pink and brown and nothing else. A tinkle of tiny bells to her left spun her back around. She crouched and willed her claws to appear.
Whoa,
Raisin said as he almost walked into her for the second time.
this is not different. The same, but different. I don't think we're in the same place anymore.
Where's Delani?
Slab asked after he and Ganner joined them. Theo was hot on their heels, reuniting the group save for their unlikely guide.
We're not alone.
Ganner drew his sword without asking. Raisin knocked his arrow, but didn't draw the string back without a target. Another giggle had them all turning to look ahead of them, where a natural path led through the flowery bushes and trees.
Got you!
Arika bolted through the brush toward the voices. She ran under an archway made of intertwined flowering vines and moss and found Delani on his back on the ground. A tall but dangerously thin young woman sat on his chest, her knees on either side of his torso, and her hands holding his to the ground. Long brown hair fell about her face and down her back, concealing her nudity. Arika came to a quick stop and stared at the scene. She straightened and let her claws return to her human guise.
What is this?
Oh,
The girl astride Delani jumped. She got caught and fell, rolling on the moss off to Delani's side.
There you are.
Arika turned and looked at the archway they'd walked through.
We were right behind you.
Then why did it take days for you to get here?
Days?
Balls.
We are somewhere else. This is not our realm.
Who are you?
Arika demanded of the naked girl that was picking herself up off the ground.
I'm Annie.
She looked them over and then looked down at Delani.
You're like him.
Hardly.
We're from the same place, which is not here. Where is this, Annie?
She shrugged and grabbed her hair and began twirling her fingers in it.
It's here. I don't know. I grew up here.
The woods.
Raisin warned and drew the string back on his bow. He moved his bow slowly and said,
Come out or else.
Or else what?
Or else I put an arrow in its arse.
Slab snickered. A bush filled with yellow and orange flowers shook and then began to buzz. A host of insects, flower petals, and even motes of twinkling light rose up from it and floated through the air into their new clearing. They swelled and shrank, pulsing in size and shape, until they took on a humanoid form that floated less than an inch above the ground.
Is this really happening?
It is.
Theo kissed his holy symbol.
Don't harm him.
Arika saw the figure standing still and not advancing. She turned and said,
Lower your bow, Raisin.
Raisin eased the tension on his string and relaxed his arm so it was pointing at the ground.
Be careful.
Arika faced the figure and asked,
Who are you?
When it spoke, its voice came from what looked like a combination of tinkling bells and buzzing insects. Yet it was crisp and clear in the language they'd spoken to it in.
Names have power. I am the guardian of this gate.
I knew it.
Knew what? What gate is he talking about? How is he guarding it?
The gate we came through.
The priest remained confused.
We came through a gate.
We're in a Fey realm, pockets of intense natural powers and beings that spring up in places where nature is untouched by civilization.
That sounds... I don't even know.
Are you the ruler of this realm?
Annie's fingers stopped twisting her hair. She laughed.
No, I'm Annie.
Oh, boy.
Delani sat up.
There are others. They've been waiting for you to get here.
Well, we're here, although we should leave now, like right now.
Theo looked around and then glanced back at the nude young woman.
Why?
Don't eat or drink anything here. Don't touch anything if you can avoid it. It can have strange effects or even leave you trapped here.
I've been eating and drinking fine.
You're an elf?
I am.
Slab smacked his palm to his face.
You are, you dolt?
Of course I am. I meant, why should that matter?
You're an elf. Don't our people have stories about the Fae?
Raisin turned to Arika and the others.
Don't any of you?
I've heard of them. Not much, though. My captors didn't share unless it involved their research on me.
Raisin winced.
Master has mentioned them a time or two, but they did not concern me, and he didn't not go into detail.
Raisin sighed.
Well, Delony is an elf, and elves are related to the Fae, although the relation is distant if he didn't come from a place such as this.
Definitely did not.
Being related means he's the least likely to be affected.
The cloud-shaped man gestured with a buzzing arm.
Come. The Queen will see you now.
Queen.
The rulers call themselves different things. Queen, king, ruler, archfey, or who knows what else.
Lovely.
She's nice enough. Just don't make her mad.
Why not?
Delony considered the question a moment and then admitted,
I don't know. I was told not to. That's all.
By who?
Annie raised her hand.
Let's meet the Queen.
I'll take you.
Annie waved them forward, grinned, and said,
Come on. It might be a lot of fun.
Sweet baby rock eater.
Put your weapons away.
Raisin did as she asked and added,
Not like it'll make a difference.
Arika's eyes narrowed, but she didn't ask. Instead, she followed Annie out of the grove and down a path marked with flat stones set in the ground. Ganner offered Delony a hand and helped him up on their way to meet the Queen. The stepping stone path wound through the surreal forest until it broadened into a clearing with a beautiful starlit sky overhead and towering evergreen trees lining the sides. A small stream ran across the clearing at the far end, and on the other side of it, a silver-needled tree with bark that looked like red fur provided roots that crisscrossed one another to make a throne. A white woman sat in the throne with a circle made of flowering vines and a sash across her body that was woven out of moss and leaves. Her legs were crossed, but the left side of her chest was bare, revealing a small but perky breast with a butterfly perched upon the tip of it. Delony's whisper was almost a shout.
That's her.
The Queen wasn't the only one in the clearing. Standing on either side of her were other fantastical beings. Two had the upper bodies of bare women and the legs and horns of goats. Another looked like a person made of sticks and leaves. Another looked very much like an elf, save his ears were exceptionally elongated and so pointed they looked like they could be used to tip an arrow. Needles swirled on either side of the clearing as though caught up in eddies of wind. They took humanoid shapes, much as the Guardian had, and stood silently in review.
Queen Satine. These are Delany's companions he spoke about.
Queen Satine. Yes, these are, my friends. May I introduce Lady Arika, Slab, Ganner, Raisin, and Theo.
Your Grace.
Theo said and bowed deeply before her. Ah, you've come at last. What tribute do you offer?
Tribute.
Raisin groaned.
Is that now how mortals show appreciation for the boon I have offered?
It can be. If I knew what boon it is you performed.
Satine leaned forward. The butterfly on her nipples flexed its wings, but did not take flight.
Little Annie there. Why, just the other day, she seemed no more than a babe.
Annie giggled.
The other day? I've been here for several days. I mean, the wine here is good, but it's not that good. Is it?
Oh no,
Arika turned to Raisin.
what is it? This is why they say don't deal with the Fae.
What's going on?
Slab, did you get the names of the missing children?
Aye, but there wasn't anyone named. Shed a rock. Are you saying she's not Annie? She's Annabelle?
Raisin grimaced.
How old is Annabelle?
She was the young one, about a year old.
She doesn't look a year old to me.
Toddlers are challenging. Loud, messy, and they can't entertain or even feed themselves.
Time works funny here, entirely at the whim of the realm's ruler.
You mean Annie's been here 18 years?
It's possible, but I think time sped up for her.
Arika turned to Annie.
Annie, how long do you remember being here?
She tilted her head to consider the question.
All my life. I've always been here. I think. I don't remember much. Talking to and playing with Delony mostly.
Amazing. I've heard of similar magic before.
So this is one of the missing children? Are the others here too?
Arika turned back to the bored-looking queen.
Queen Satine. Are there others too? Or just Annie?
One of my scouts found her. She'd been taken by some mortals that clearly had plans for her, and she felt bad for her. She brought her here instead. Not to worry, I've punished the scout.
How long has she been here, Your Grace?
I have heard that mortal place a great importance on reaching an age of 18 years. Why, I do not know. They are often fit to be on their own far younger. Still, this seemed like the best thing to do.
Arika nodded and turned to Ganner.
Ganner, my old outfit, give it to Annie.
Ganner nodded and hurried to get to his pack and haul it out. Now that they knew Annie was a human girl and not some fairy creature, it didn't seem right letting her run about naked.
What tribute?
We have little to spare. We're in service to the mayor of Sparketh, as it is in search of the children like Annie. That service will pay off supplies for the survivors of an infernal assault.
A shadow crossed Satine's face. She twitched her lips and made her expression of mild disinterest return.
A shame. I can't just let her leave without something.
Arika bristled for a moment and then calmed herself.
A trade? Maybe an elf for a human?
Delaunay grinned and then realized he was the elf being offered.
Hey,
Could we be of service to you, Your Grace?
Oh no, don't do that.
Satine tilted her head and smiled.
I like you more and more, pious one.
Theo beamed at her praise.
My realm is limited. In ages long past, the realms of my kind were linked together, but we languished under the primordials that ruled. When their time ended, our realm was fractured into pockets. There is a remnant in your realm that has established a link near to you.
Travel there and destroy it, and I will consider that compensation for the time and energy spent caring for young Annie. Arika considered her request before asking,
Do you have any more knowledge of where this remnant or link is?
West of here.
Here or there?
Both. This may not be your realm, but it is also not your realm.
Arika digested that before nodding.
I understand. West then, to where?
Look for someplace hot. Very, very hot.
Arika smirked as the memory of smoke rising from a mountain in the west came to her.
Your Grace?
Satine smiled at him.
Yes.
You mentioned your scout saved Annabelle from some bad people. Do you know?
Were there others?
Other bad people?
My apologies. I meant other children.
Satine tilted her head a moment before answering.
There may have been, but she was not sure. She did state they had a wagon with a large cage, though.
Theo bowed his head in deference.
Thank you, Queen Satine.
Very well.
The fairy queen blinked after a moment and added,
Well, be off. Return once your task is done. Until then, I have nothing further for you.
Just like that?
Be grateful.
Satine locked her gaze with Raisin and said with a fake smile.
I see you too, Angel Spawn.
Raisin stiffened and then glanced at his companions and shrugged.
We should go.
Arika ignored the rogue and continued to address the queen.
By your words, do you mean to tell us you may have more for us when we return?
I might know more about the human spawn trampling the forests. Or I might have tired of you by then and not wish to be bothered. For now, you are new and interesting. The longer you tarry, the less interest I have.
Arika heeded her barely veiled words and nodded to Raisin.
Yes, we should be going.
Ganner grabbed the eager Delaunay by the back of his shirt and pulled him back.
I'll lead, if you don't mind.
mind? No, of course not. It's just, I'm an elf and we are in a forest.
Headed to a very, very hot place.
Delaunay frowned.
She did say that, didn't she? Very well. I'll defer to your judgment.
Ganner smirked and led the ground back out through the archway and down the stone-marked path all the way until the forest lost its luster around them. The humidity set back in even as the sky brightened with the presence of the sun overhead.
A little dry heat might do us good.
I'm wondering what an angel spawn is.
Raisin winced.
Just a bit of slang. Think nothing of it. Some people done wrong with a grudge, that's all.
Not to worry. You can tell us what else it isn't as we make our way west.
I hope it's quick. If those children are in danger from the people that took them, we may not have time to do the Queen's bidding first.
Satine won't be pleased if we rate her quest second.
Arika sighed. How had Master always made leading seem like such an easy